morning. I'm quite tired. I'm going to make this quick. I want to keep up to the daily. My voice is going a little bit, so I'm going to keep this quick. Long story short, I spent the evening hanging out with energetic people, which was fun, but I'm quite tired. I accidentally confused someone with someone I know for a long time without realizing, which was quite embarrassing. But yeah, that's getting out of the way. There's not really much to say about the social stuff besides that. But yeah, let's stick to starting from the top. So I did mostly graphic stuff today, and the first one was about memory management. It started off with an introduction about the whole summit, but this memory management in Snowdrop, which is this Ubisoft engine, and there are some, I won't be able to explain all of it, but the gist of it is that they had this problem where their tools want to consume as much memory as possible so nothing is wasted. But they have a problem where once you start sending stuff, like heaps of memory over to the GPU, you can't fix it easily. Like if something's overcommitted, you can't just free it because you have to send that to the GPU, and that can be difficult. That's a problem, so you don't want to overcommit. So you want to avoid, be conservative of commitment, but you want to maximize space, so you're trying to strike this balance. This is VRAM overcommitting. This is the thing. And they go over some tools for debugging, such as NVIDIA Insight. The main ones they shout out are NVIDIA Insight, GPU View, and Windows Prep Form, which are all on the Windows system. That's the idea. All useful for debugging. They ran into issues where, with residency in specific, which is how long memory lasts on your budget. And like I said, freeing is difficult. So the system they end up devising is a method that will organize the heaps, because their old system the mipmaps would be on all sorts of different heaps randomly, so when you free things, it could ruin mipmap levels. So a texture could suddenly look terrible or blurry because it's using another MIP when you go out of editor and load up another video. So weird problems like that, or like in editor, like this is happening in editor because it's all still running on GPU to visualize all of this after all. So they changed their system to use tile mapping so that the heaps would be sorted based off the mipmap. That way you're only free the lowest level, the biggest MIPs possible, and organize things better. Just double checking some stuff. They ran into a problem when actually using real-time rendering, is that their tile allocation system and their memory maximization system, they're conceptually opposed. One wants to use all of the memory, and one wants to be as conservative as possible. So it wants to allocate, it wants to basically start freeing stuff as much as possible. It wants to, if you go over budget, you're reduced immediately, which could lead to problems where stuff starts getting freed and then it starts maximizing again. And so and taking up space it shouldn't and causing issues like for them. You could alt tab somewhere else and the textures would start getting blurry, for example. It's weird artifacting would start happening because it's causing these conflicts. So what they did is they just disabled the residency manager because it's not actually useful in their use case of real time. It's useful for devs, but not useful for the player, which makes sense. That's I think, a reasonable solution. Yeah, that was a fun talk. That was fun. It was an interesting talk. I learned a lot more about memory management, about things to think about like residency and overcommitment and these more subtler problems that you don't necessarily think about. Love to push my optimization skills. It's something that I need to put more effort into. The second one is ray tracing. And this one's really dense, and I don't think I quite understood it. I'm not gonna. Basically, it's just, this is for Avatar, by the way. Point, Avatar Indoor. This talk, the gist of it is that they use a bunch of the light probes, just light probes all over the place, and then they use clever usage of ray tracing to figure out how they're going to send their rays different points, and how they're going to calculate their shadow cascades and whatnot. And they can ray trace at different resolutions and they'll get some noise and then use a denoiser to clean it up to fix it. There's some interesting problems with it, like because of a lot of global illuminations reflecting off the bottom. If you go up, their current probe system will have light leakage at the top, or light leakage one. They need thick walls, otherwise the light will leak through. And also, if they go up, the shadow cascades on the floor and the reflections off the floor ruin the lighting. That lighting is gone, so it looks weirder the more you go up. What they fix with octrees and having more aware probes, which can tell if they're indoors. They also want to improve their ray distribution because right now it's too uniform. That's just it. Again, this talk was incredibly dense. There's a lot about ray tracing that I don't quite understand, and I think it's a problem I encountered last year. It's something that I'm going to need to buff up on. So however, I did notice that they were using SDFs for like terrain, and it's an indicator that SDFs, they keep popping up in unexpected, well, these are not that unexpected, but I've been seeing them pop up more, and I find that fascinating. The next talk is, I think, one of the more accessible topics. This is visual effects, cyberpunk, black wall. And what this means is in Cyberpunk Phantom Liberty, the free DLC, if I understand that correctly, there's a concept called the black wall, which is like a forbidden zone for AI to hide in this forbidden space called the black wall. And they want to demonstrate that by making everything look red with computerly glitchiness, and so that they want to have it so that when you enter a digital world, you watch as it composes into existence the parts coming together and stuff like that. They want to show it intruding on your world. So glitchiness, things coming undone, like cracks in the world, that kind of thing. It's a cool effect. And they do it. And they had a lot of iteration over this. And they go through their many different iterations of this abstract space. So the gist of it is they have an abstracted texture generated from planes, at least at first. This is the first draft. They have a bunch of planes that generated this intersection of planes, and they have a lot of offsets. It's all red, and it's a start, but the problem, they have a little bit of a distortion. The problem is that it's too flat, and it lacks a real complexity to it. And so they start adding the, hold on, I was going to again. Yeah, basically, they start off this concept to get down to a two-color palette system. They have all these planes to make the lines that look more computery, for lack of a word, and they start adding bits of code. And they start cleaning up the controller. But the problem is it looks really flat, so they start using cube tiles. So they have to go, it's so that everything starts getting offset away from like a cube. And they create a bunch of masks, including the interesting use of assigned distance functions where they create these rebars, like steel beams. And what they're used for is to create a space where, like how far everything is supposed to be offset, like a mask, so that you know which parts of the scene are supposed to have the cracks, and then you can show your background effect through these cracks with these rebars. So you can start offsetting it in these tiles, and it looks quite cool in practice. It's a shame I can't replicate it. And they're able to recreate this with particles by basically just using the particles like a mask. Like they mask the particles, and if they're over an object, the effect will appear. And they also applied this with on-screen UI as well, a meta UI version of it. And it's frankly a really cool use of G buffers and post-processing. It's a very neat effect. I'm glad they did it. I went to then the animation direction talk. Basically, how do you direct your mocap actors? The main takeaways from that is it's about getting people comfortable. It's about communication. It's about making sure that they're not overwhelmed by information. It's also about, because you don't want to get them to a weird headspace. Otherwise, they'll start doing things that don't make any sense. They don't quite understand the character right. Just what seems to be happened to Neil, according, or at least implied by the talk. It's about, basically being a good leader and reading people and making sure that they are taken care of, and they don't have to stress about things like, am I allowed to break? Can I make some space for myself? If they are having to ask that question, that's a problem because they're getting distracted, and it means they can't trust you. Like it's a sign that they can't get, you should be doing that before they even ask, which I think makes so much sense. And very interesting talk. One of my favorite ones, this is back to graphics again, one of my favorite ones is, there was this talk about decoupled shading. And decoupled shading is when you do all of the shading first and then everything else later, like the actual rasterization, which just means all of your lighting calculations are completely removed from the typical things that we expect from geometry. already mapping textures to the same place every single time. That means if they're stable, you alias, you have free anti-aliasing, and it makes everything look really crystal clear. Now to do this, you essentially, to sum it up, you essentially have to make 2 new shader passes. And you have to, and it's based around the concept of shadles, which are discrete units of, basically it's a section of a virtual texture, which stores virtual memory of your units of shading from sampling various textures that you're mapping into this virtual shader megatexture. And basically, you end up having to do things like making your own page mapping system and work queues. And by the time you're doing that, you're basically making a little mini GPU inside a GPU, manipulating everything, and using these work queues to figure out how you're supposed to send your comfort shaders to go out and shade the different textures. And it's all pretty fast and doesn't have too much overhead problems. And you can allocate it in parallel with the forward renderer, so you can actually blend those results. So you can bolt it onto your full renderer and not have to pick one or the other. In cases where sorry about that. In cases where the forward renderer would actually be better, like with low objects in the background where it just creates a bunch of extra detail for nothing, you can switch to forward rendering and get the advantages of that as well. So you can actually get the best of both worlds. The 2 shader stages, here the shadle stage and the marking pass, because the way this works, you have to mark out which places are visible. And then once you have that, you can build up, okay, these are the actual parts of the textures and such that I need to map onto the scene. And these are the parts that actually need shading. And then you apply those calculations once in the shadle stage. And they made their own little material shader language to handle these weird new stages. So it was a very cool talk, very pragmatic. And I spoke with him frequently afterwards, and it very briefly. And he was talking to this other guy while I was waiting to talk to him, and he basically his goal, he said, was to convince people that this is viable, that this is, or at least that this, you can use it in your system right now and still have a good use case for it, which I think is something compelling and useful. I think that's a good way to get people more interested, because like stuff like, say, projective geometric algebra, for example, things are, stuff like where you have these new technologies. There are many cases where you can find something that is theoretically useful, but where implementing it is so difficult that it becomes difficult to adopt. So it becomes this problem that prevents it from being used. But yeah, that's a cool one. Here's a path tracing one I didn't get. I missed part of it because I was talking. I was trying to wait for an opportunity to talk to the coupled shading speaker, Dan Baker, I believe his name. Dan Baker, Don Baker. Anyway, the path dense. I got the second half where it's more about what you do with sampling. Yeah, basically, again, I didn't quite understand this. Basically, it's all about making sure that your sampling is good and high quality and not consistent, but unbiased. It's all about reducing bias and making sure that you're prioritizing your lights correctly. But hey, you can get some cool stuff with path tracing, like transmissive shadow. So if an object is semi-transparent, like a balloon, you shine a light through it, the shadow is colored in real life. You can replicate that with a path tracer, and that's real time. It's not baked. It can be dynamic, which is really cool. The potential you could do for lighting, because something to understand also is that this is not just ooh, cool, shiny stuff, right? But the cool thing about advances in graphics tech like this is that means you can make and like stylized renderings where you have this property. So path tracing can be used even in stuff like NPR, theoretically. Don't go over it in this case, but theoretically, you could do that. I can't think of an example of someone doing that, but you could theoretically try to find new ways to use these tools. Because simplifying lighting systems is the goal of NPR. It takes the physically based and starts making these stylized simplifications. So these advances can do a lot. I missed the work graph one, which is important because this is the final one I went to as a Q&A. And the Q&A is basically a bunch of people were curious about work graphs and why they're cool, and they're cool apparently because you can, again, I don't know, I imagine it's something to do with being able to manage which work is being done at a time, which I think would be pretty cool. Something like that. I don't know. I can theoretically see it. It's something probably compute related. The guy who did the coupled shading theoretically proposed that work graphs could help with the coupled systems and make that better. Someone asked a rambly question about management that eventually they got an actual interesting question in there, but they just they didn't ask it well. I don't think they asked it well because it seemed like it confused the speaker. Basically, it's just saying, how do you handle the fact that things have gotten more specialized? And the answer, and I didn't really get an answer to that. Because again, it was a poorly worded question. My summary of the question is better than the actual question. But what's interesting is that the specialization makes conflict management hard because it's hard for you to figure out who actually or can create issues where people start blaming each other for things and you don't know how to step in and I'm saying it out loud. I don't think it's a specialization problem per se, but the idea is that they're fighting with each other and you don't know how to use the language to calm them down because the communication issues causes that. Or at least that's what this guy was saying. It sounds more like a skill issue. cross-platform profiling, and the answer is the best way to handle profiling in most cases for like shaders, like performance, is just turning on and off shaders. Really, like that's always gonna work. Which having the ability to quickly to turn things on and off would be great. It's always a good tool to have, and that's a good tool you should get. But when dealing with like crashes, well, get better architectural knowledge and open the black box of the shader compiler. They pointed out, someone tried to ask, will path tracing take over everything? And then basically, starting from the decouple guy and spreading out to all the panelists, they're all like, no, it's a tool. You pick your tools. There's no such thing as universal multi-tool. It's just a tool. All of these styles are just tools that you need to learn to use for good use cases. And I think it's such a great point. I think it's easy for people to want to be like, to look for something to solve, to save them from the work of having to think about which tools to pick, but sometimes it's just not going to be a thing. It's always going to be a thing you need to learn from. And the guy points out that like to make anything at all, also is the fact that to get like the pixels on the screen from the circuits took hundreds of thousands of thousands of people working on code from all parts of this from the OS. And it's kind of crazy how much complexity there is to graphics programming, to programming this, and it's, I think, a point of beauty to reflect on. But yeah, big picture optimization is more important than micro optimization. Very common bit of advice, something always to keep in mind. Asked a little bit about AI rendering, which so far the answer is like rendering entire frames through AI does not seem to be a thing that is happening, and frankly I am skeptical of that being a thing for a lot of reasons. Someone asked, hey, how long did it take for you to build some of these stuff? How long did it take for you to get where you are, I guess? This is some guy wanting to break into the industry, so I could sympathize. And they point out that like a lot of these proposals and projects can take like a decade to make. Work graphs took 4 years to make. And it's also like, basically the thing he points out, that one guy points out, is basically just learn to accept that a lot of what you know might just have to be thrown out. You might be working on something that just becomes a dead end, and you just have to learn it. It teaches you to direct that learning, and being flexible is the most important thing. It's about being willing to learn. That's what matters. And that was it. Now, thank you for watching. I am going to go sleep. I'm going to try to take it easier tomorrow. Until next time.